Welcome to this week's episode of The Path Less Chosen, the podcast showing you the careers they don't teach you about in school. My name's Sol.
I'm Jamie.
And this week we have Charlie Davis on the podcast. And Charlie is a Snapchat and TikTok sensation, amassing over 10 million views. And he's created the Jet House, which is a creator house that has gathered 10 billion views together in its first house and is now creating creator houses all over the UK and the rest of the world. So, Jamie, tell me a bit more about what we can expect from this episode.
Okay, so number one is going to be, even if it's not a good place to start, just get started today. That's the best thing you can do. Number two is just to be a problem solver in life and have the problem solving mindset. And number three is if you're looking to get in social media, how to go from 0 to 1 million followers in just 6 months.
Amazing. Very well summed up, Jamie. Let's get him on. Charlie, thank you very much for coming on the Path Less Chosen pod. In one sentence, would you mind describing what you're up to right now?
I can't really summarize it in one sentence. It's, in a couple of sentences, we run these content hubs across the world in the UK, Europe, Dubai, where a bunch of influencers and creators and creatives live creating content on social media.
To jump in to begin with my burning question, I think the first thing I saw was your TikTok. How did you go about amassing nearly 5 million followers on TikTok?
It's interesting. I started posting videos initially because I didn't really have much else to do. It was during lockdown, and at the time, TikTok's reach was crazy. I mean, you could post a video with 0 followers and it'd get millions and millions of views. And I just kept consistent with posting. It was consistent of posting. It was learning more about the algorithm, learning more about how to make these videos. And after a while of doing things, you just kind of pick up how to get these videos to go viral. So yeah, it's been amassed over the last few years.
I love that you just say you started posting, because I think, like, as someone who's dipped their toe in the last year, that took me a long place to get to, of just being like, oh, I'm just going to start posting. What actually got you to be like, oh, I'm just going to film and post? Like, that's a big step for a lot of people, right?
I think a lot of people think of it like, okay, I want to start making videos, but I need the perfect camera. I need the perfect editing software. I need all of these people in these videos. I need to move here. I need the lighting. I need this. I need that. I think the key to it is just to start posting. Your first video isn't going to be very good. My first video was terrible, so I think it's just going for it and just posting, and over time you'll get gradually better and better and better. I would say if you're going to get into social media and creating content, it's definitely for the long haul. When chatting to creators or brands and they're not seeing instant results, it's always a case of, look, give this time, let it kind of soothe over. And it takes a while.
Obviously, I think that's such an important message to share, because on this podcast, a lot of the people kind of listening will always think they don't want to take that leap and go outside their comfort zone and start something. And I've always said to Sol, kudos to him, because he actually went about and started. So I'd be interested to know, what would you tell those kind of people that may be debating it, other than just go and start? How would they go about finding their own niche, and how did you go about doing it yourself to then create an audience that that your content would appeal to?
I think it's all starts with what you're interested in. I've seen some of Sol's videos. It's a lot about happiness and talking with different people. Just start at what you're interested in and what you enjoy watching, I think, is the best thing. For example, I used to be a magician. Working in bars and clubs across London for several years before I did anything on social media. And then my first social media video I filmed was me just doing a card trick directly to the camera. Nobody really saw it. Nobody viewed it. But because I enjoyed what I was doing, I was just making more and more and more of these videos. So it would be doing what you enjoy doing, which I know is such a cliche thing, but if you're going to be in it for the long haul, you're going to need to enjoy it and not be doing something that you don't enjoy.
And do you think that magician role played a fundamental part into you kind of accepting public embarrassment in public eye in your work?
I think so. I mean, it taught me so many different things, from being able to, confidence firstly. I mean, if you speak to any magician in the world, the reason they get into it in the first place is because they're that very nerdy, shy, nervous kid in school that wants to do something that will impress everyone else for the most part. So yeah, I would say that it taught me how to sell myself to get more gigs. It gave me a lot of confidence. It taught me how to pitch for further gigs. I used to go to wedding fairs, etc. It taught me how to speak with people who are a lot older than me at the time. You know, I was sort of 14, 15, going around restaurants and things like this. So I think it taught a lot of different skills. And I think from a social media perspective, it definitely taught that as well. To be more out there and to put yourself out there, I definitely think so. But I don't think it's necessary. I feel like anyone can kind of create these videos, and you just have to kind of get over that initial hump of what people are going to think of you.
I think listening to that story, you sound like someone who was always destined for what we describe as obviously a path less chosen. You know, we don't get to speak to many people that even at the age of 14 or 15 were doing something that was quite unique, but clearly doing quite well in it. So during that time when you were working as a street magician, as young as 14 and 15, was there ever a point that you considered, you know, this might be my career? And when did the whole content creation idea come about? Did you ever consider what we describe as a path like more chosen and a more conventional career?
Yes, I was learning magic simply because I didn't have anything else to do in like my younger years of school, and I didn't have very many friends, so I was just learning these tricks in school. I was learning it for years and years and years and never showed anyone a single trick. I started doing it, and I started doing it for free initially, going around to sort of bars, restaurants, and literally just performing for tips. So people would put a £5 note, a £10 note in my pocket, kind of thing, when I was 14, 15. And then from there, people started paying me, 20, £30 cash in hand to go to their party and perform at a gig. And then from there, I mean, it kind of just spiraled. Like, I did a lot of big sort of weddings, big events. I also got a contract on a cruise ship at one point, which then I did for a couple of months, and then obviously COVID hit, and that fell through.
And so, like, just fill in the gaps between, like, magician to content, and then I'm sure we'll come on to, like, the crazy stuff that's going on at the Jet House. But, like, where did like, magician slightly get parked for other stuff?
Yeah, so I had the contract on the cruise ship, and then COVID came around and absolutely everything stopped. And I was earning a decent amount of money through doing gigs and performing in the UK. And I was like, right, I now don't have any gigs. I have nothing to do. Everyone's locked in their houses. What should I do? And I had a few other friends that were magicians as well that I was doing gigs with. And I said to them, maybe I should start posting videos on social media, as we were kind of discussing before, right? They were all like, we shouldn't necessarily do this whole social media TikTok. Like, that's a thing where people do these kind of cringe dances, which is exactly what it was at the time, right? During like 2019. And then I said to the guys, look, I'm going to start posting videos on social media, started building a following and amassing a following. And then my videos started earning more than I was getting paid for these gigs. And initially I only started making the videos to actually get more gigs. I thought, if people see me on social media, they will then want to book me for their wedding once everything opens up. So it was this kind of gap of like, really adapt or die. Like, you either bite the bullet and do this social media stuff, or you just wait and wait and wait, and hopefully, fingers crossed, once everything opens again, people will want to see live magic performances, which even now, it still isn't the reality. Like, a lot of the people magicians who didn't post on social media are now struggling to get gigs. I really feel like the art form has slowly sort of died out amongst COVID because people just haven't seen it as much. So yeah, just started creating relentless videos and amassed a bit of a following. I grew from 0 to 1 million followers within 6 months, completely from scratch on TikTok. It's, once again, as we were talking about before, it's just kind of doing what you enjoy doing, and you'll post every day and keep consistent.
I don't know where you're getting those followers from, because I've posted for that long and I've got about 6. So
To be fair, it was a lot easier time back then. It was a lot easier time to get followers on TikTok. I really feel that opportunity now is, I know we'll get onto it, but it is not so much on TikTok anymore, but more on Snapchat for the most part. That reaches now, and people are growing like crazy. But it was definitely easier back then when I was doing
it's insane. I think, well, firstly, kudos to you, because we were actually having a conversation the other day about how, like, when you first do the first steps down some kind of path less chosen, actually a lot of people can see it as cringy, or like they kind of object to it, and you feel like a little bit of pushback. But actually, the fact that you took that step has obviously now got you towards where you are now, right? Do you think that's a kind of possibility for everyone if they can get into that same kind of mindset of turning like a situation like COVID into something positive to create something different for yourself? Or do you think there's a certain like personality or like personal skill set that you need to be able to then take that kind of leap?
Yeah, I think the main skill set really is sort of problem solving. Like you're going to be hit with problems in life, whether it's, with relationships or finances or business or whatever it may be. And that kind of problem solving mindset of being like, okay, I've faced a hurdle. How am I going to readjust and see what I can do here? And it's also like taking risks as well. When I was in school, I definitely wasn't the cool kid doing card tricks to a room of people who weren't particularly that interested at the time. It was, I feel like taking risks and, you hear it with a lot of people that have, either successful businesses or have built a career online or YouTubers or whatever. Everyone initially thinks they're kind of weird for doing it. And then all of a sudden, once they've made something from it, it's then a conversation around, they knew what they were doing with X, Y, and Z.
I love that. It's such a theme that we have while speaking to so many people, is that a lot of things start out as, what is someone doing? Like, why is someone doing that? It's such a weird thing to do. And then everyone we speak to is obviously kind of far enough that they can look back and go, I'm so happy I did that. But it's such a theme that you have that like unnerve at the start.
Okay, just a quick interruption before we go into more detail on the career of our guest. We imagine that you probably had quite a few conversations with friends where you talk to them about how they're not enjoying their job and all they do is look forward to the weekend. So what we'd ask is that you go onto the app you're listening on, only if you're not driving, click the share button, and maybe you can use the favorites that come up and pop up straight away, or click WhatsApp or click Snapchat and just send it to that friend that comes to mind. Because the more people that can listen to this, hopefully the more people will be inspired to pursue different careers that actually they'll end up enjoying. So if we could ask that you do that, that would be massively helpful for us growing the podcast. Back to the episode.
Was it always a very clear line for you, or did you occasionally go, I might sack this off and, I don't know, go to university, or sack this off and go and get a kind of proper job, if I could call it that?
Not really. I always wanted to be, at the time, I wanted to be like a street magician and be like Dynamo and David Blaine and these sort of people that are on TV. I feel like the sort of risk is something that I feel like everyone should take. And then not caring what people think about you, I think, is so key as well. And sometimes it can be people who care about you the most. Sometimes it could be family. Sometimes it could be parents, very, very close friends. I feel like when you're young, at least, you shouldn't be scared into doing things. I feel like your 20s your teenage years and your 20s are very much like experimental years. Even in like your 30s, you're kind of just finding out what you want to do. And a lot of people's life regret, I can't remember who said it to me when I was super young, but a lot of people's life regrets is that they just didn't do what they wanted to do. Like, we're all gonna, we're all gonna die one day, right? So why not do something that you want to do rather than something you don't enjoy? Even if you try it out and it doesn't work, what's the like? If you're in your who cares? You just readjust, do something else, or try again, or whatever it may be. I feel like there's so much pressure on people to get it right the first time, and I don't feel like anyone who has done anything really has succeeded straight away the first time. And
yeah,
sort of thing.
No, I think that's a brilliant message. Like, what's the worst that can happen, right? And we've spoken to a lot of people that said probably in your 20s is the best time to do it. But I think what's interesting about your story is the fact that in that first 6 months, you went from 0 to 1 million followers. You clearly kind of did do something right at the start, and not just at the start. You now amassed like 5 times that following on TikTok, for example, and you continue to stay relevant. Like, you clearly are appealing to the audiences that follow you. And you also mentioned Snapchat. How have you gone about it since COVID? So 4 years ago, continuing to be attractive to these kind of people and your following, and to continue to grow?
So it was during lockdown. I thought to myself, right, okay, I'm still going to go out. There were some restrictions, but like, you still go out and meet people. So I was like, I'm going to do magic videos where I can go out and remain at a kind of safe distance, but like read people's mind from 6 feet away. It was this series that I did, right? I was like trying to do this thing. And then all of a sudden the country was shut down fully. And I was like, okay, this is a big problem. What's going to happen? I saw at the time there was a lot of these content houses that were popping up. There was a few in America, and for the most part, they were kind of full of these sort of very annoying American TikTokers and dancers and things like this. And I thought, well, there's not really anything like this in Europe. I don't really have much money saved at all from the gigs. As I mentioned, I was just getting cash in hand. But maybe there's a way here that we could replicate a content house in an area that doesn't necessarily have as harsh restrictions, and where we can get a bunch of influencers living in a house and creating content, because then all of a sudden from 1 million followers, I can maybe go to 2 million, 3 million, whatever it may be. So I was looking at places that didn't really have as harsh restrictions as we had here in the UK. And I came across a place called Javier, which is a small little town in Spain, which is just outside of Benidorm. And I called 9 of my friends up. I said, look, I found the perfect house. It's a 10-bedroom house. Because it's COVID, it's only 2,500 euros a month. If we all split the rent, we only have to pay 250 euros a month in rent. And we can live in this house and make videos. I got 9 people to agree to it. A lot of people didn't want to do it. And we got on a flight the next week and landed in this house. A lot of us never even met each other before. And we all started making videos. And from the first month we were in the house, we had combined over 1 billion views between the 10 of us. People were watching us from all around the world. And there was a lot of Spanish news outlets that were reporting on us. There was Polish TV, German TV. People wanted to come to the house and see what this was all about. And we had agencies hit us up about doing stuff with brands. And then all of a sudden, month 2 came round and we had brand Jack Wills, actually. Shout out to them, because they sponsored the house fully. So then we no longer had to pay rent. And we were also getting paid to make videos. And that was just within the second month. And then from there, I mean, that was sort of 4 or 5 years ago now. It is very much fast forward to this thing where we've replicated this formula here in the UK, in Europe, in Dubai, soon in Saudi. We're doing a big house project out there. I never really got into it for the business sense or to make money. I mean, I was a street magician earning barely anything. It certainly wasn't anything to do with that, but it just kind of snowballed once again from that taking of risk. You have to take the risk, and if it fails and we moved to the house and for whatever reason we couldn't afford to pay the rent and whatever, we would have all just gone home and moved back in with our parents. That's it, realistically. But at least we would have tried, and at least it's a story to tell.
That is a mental story, unbelievable. And I think for me, like listening to it, I'm so like not clued up with the whole social media world. Like I barely on TikTok and stuff, so I kind of hear about this stuff on the news, like you're saying, like you were covered on the news, the whole idea of a content house, etc. But before we go into the whole expansion and how you've turned it into what is clearly now a very successful business, just enlighten me a little bit. What exactly is a content house? So you're getting guys together. What does a day-to-day look like? How does it work in terms of like a lifestyle living in a house that creates content?
It was very interesting. I mean, back then it was very much like Big Brother, where everyone kind of got along with each other for the first couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden, because you're living in an environment working together all the time, people start to crack, and there are a few arguments, etc., between people. But like I said, I was just 18 years old at the time. I didn't know how to deal with this and the managing of this thing. Back then, it was very much a case of, right, we're going to get up, we're going to have a meeting 9 o'clock every morning. We had a big whiteboard. There were other content houses that were trying to pop up in the UK and across the world. We said, right, we need to get more views than these people, because if we get more views than these people and we talk about it, all of the brands are going to want to work with us rather than these other houses. So we would have several houses, not to name any names, but several of them, we would have their views and we'd be like, oh, we're beating them, we're doing this, we're doing that. What are we possibly going to do for these, to beat these guys? We had a group YouTube channel at the time, so we were making all sorts of videos. We were doing these crazy sort of hide and seek challenges and all these other different things, which we had people in the house brainstorming on. And it was just basically a place where we were thinking, how can we get the most amount of views possible? And then how can we then sell that, which, as I mentioned before, being a magician, obviously selling myself to get more gigs, how can we then sell that to brands to then pay us to make videos and integrate them within the house? Nowadays, it's very much more of a stricter, streamlined process of having brands before we just set up a random house. But that seems to be the process. It's a crazy environment.
And you touched on that there. Like, I'm so interested how that business model progressed from the first house, which I'm sure was absolutely hectic with like a load of, you say you're 18, right? And like, Jamie and I, what we were doing at 18 was definitely not creating those content houses. Like, it's mental. Like, how does that progress from like this is a really good idea to being like, okay, this is time to make it into a business?
I think it was when Jack Wills came along initially and said, look, we're going to pay you X amount to sponsor the house. And we were like, wait, that pays us all X amount per month as well as the house for the next year. So if we do this with 4 brands, 5 brands, 6 brands, maybe we could build this into more of a business. And then all of a sudden, I mean, Jack Wills at the time got acquired by Sports Direct. So then Sports Direct came to us and said, well, we want you to do this for Everlast. We want you to do this for Puma, etc. And all of their brands started getting involved. We started working with Boohoo Man. And then all of a sudden, a lot of gaming brands, a lot of music brands came along. So for example, we had a house a year ago, which we set up with Universal, where the house was kind of split into 2 segments, where there was a big music studio for the downstairs of the house where a bunch of their upcoming artists were living. And then upstairs was a bunch of really engaged TikTokers who were working with the artists in conjunction to try and help blow up some of their songs through, you know, lyric writing and also creating trends before the songs actually come out. So we realized that we then needed more than one house because it was literally impossible to then cram all of the brands into this one specific house. Some of the brands wanted to use specific influencers as well. Obviously, if you're a gaming brand or a makeup brand, you know, you want a house full of gamers or a house full of makeup artists. We were just this very general, broad house. Me being a magician online at the time, we had like a VFX creator in there. We had a random couple making couple content. We had singers, we had dancers, and we had a guy that made like business related content. It was all very much all over the place. So it needed kind of a step back and to streamline things a bit more.
It sounds like some kind of like modern day social media circus. It sounds like an incredible place to be. That's cool. So talk to us a little bit about the expansion then. When you made the realization that you need to have houses elsewhere to like start making this bigger and more of like a business, how does it work in terms of like oversight? Who's making sure that all of these houses are working in the same kind of way towards, is there someone that's like running it as a business, as like the founder? Is it someone who's like going and doing the day-to-day stuff and making sure everyone's creating the right kind of content? How does it work?
Yeah, so we have like people in-house now that are managing some of the houses. So for example, we have currently running at the moment, a big gaming house in Marbella, which is helping with a number of online gaming companies, as well as it's not so much a house, but more of a tower in Dubai where we have got a load of different apartments in which people are promoting for Dubai tourism. And, you know, there's a lot of Arabic speaking creators in there. Well, I mean, we have a lot of resource now in-house. At the time, it was just me that kind of had this idea. And obviously, you know, still being the sole founder, like we've never taken investment or anything like that. So still being the sole founder of the business, it's then a case where you're kind of 18, 19, 20 and hiring people to try and manage different fractions of these houses. And it's a weird business model. I mean, there's a lot of agencies specifically now, obviously with the boom of a lot of these online gurus talking about, you know, I'll start an agency and you can scale up to this amount of money per month and blah, blah, blah. I mean, this is a very weird business model, these houses, of kind of having this set outgoing of rent per month and then having to get brands to succeed the rent to also pay everyone to also make profit on top of that. So it's an agency model, but it's we've got people in-house that help with a lot of it now. It's a full-on company. It's not just me running around trying to do everything.
I love it. And slightly zooming out a little bit, like you mentioned a few times that like when you were growing up, like you didn't have that many friends and you weren't really sure what you wanted to do. And then I listened to you speaking then and you're like talking about profit and building businesses and like speaking really passionate about it. Do you think it's fair to say that like just starting to post online, doing the magician stuff, this has all changed your life?
100%. I mean, I sometimes joke around with some of the guys that I live with in the house and I was like, what if we never jumped on that phone call? What if I never bothered searching for that house? It's these key things. And I think, you know, if you're genuinely trying your best every single day and reaching out for every opportunity, you're going to hit. It's the same when I was a magician, you know, going around performing in bars. A lot of the time I would be allowed to perform in those bars. And there were some times where the people would ask me to leave because they hadn't hired me to actually be there. So, you know, the going around performing in bars relentlessly, even though you're not necessarily making any money and you're just kind of working on tips, it still goes back to what we were saying before, right? Of just putting yourself out there as much as possible. And I think the best way to do that now is to create content online, specifically with comedians as well. I mean, I'm booked up next week to go see Jimmy Carr. right? And Jimmy Carr was performing for years and years and years on comedy circuits for ages, and it was the same when I was kind of coming up with some of the magician stuff. You would perform on these circuits for years and kind of try and get into the clubs and get recognized. Now it's all social media. It's all, every single comedian that's coming up, every single performer that's coming up, it's through social media, 100%. So I feel like that opportunity, and as we mentioned at the beginning, creating as much content as possible, taking the risk, not necessarily caring about what people are going to think of you. It's going to, I think it will eventually pay off.
And I think definitely what's always interesting for us then is once we've heard someone and their journey to now, which obviously you've achieved a lot, you sound like you're in a brilliant position now. What is the plan for the next 5 years, for example? How does it look? Is it going to continue the same way? And what's your role within that?
So I want to expand the business massively to just kind of more houses and more things going on and stuff like this, but also kind of coming in on businesses as well. So we've worked with a lot of different brands externally, and obviously they're paying us a fee. You've seen the rise of things like Prime. You've seen the rise of things like, Mr. Beast's Beast Bars and that kind of thing. I feel like that whole creator economy, what with TikTok Shop now, I feel like it's interesting to, obviously with the huge marketing power that we have with Jet House and what's going on there, to then direct it to something that we actually have ownership of. I think that's really, really interesting. And that market is growing massively. I mean, at the minute it's valued at $1.6 trillion, the creator economy, and it'll be valued at over $6 trillion by 2030. So it's one of the fastest growing industries, and I think creating, which I still haven't exactly figured out what that product is, but I feel like some sort of product that can have the marketing power behind it is, I think, definitely the way forward.
Mental, mate. So good to hear that, and I look forward to buying like some weird random item that has your face on it, like a cereal or something like that in a few years' time. But nah, I love it. And so wrapping up with the final question that we ask all our guests. So if you were to go back to a time, probably when you were a magician or just starting in your content creator journey, what is one thing you do the same? What is one thing you do differently? And what's one thing you tell yourself to motivate yourself?
One thing I do the same is probably remain as consistent as I did. Like, for example, when I was posting initially on TikTok, it was very much a case of I was posting 20 videos a day to see what worked. And some of them would get 20 views, but then some would get 100. And then I'd make more of that style of video. So I definitely think consistency across the board, obviously, as I mentioned, with going out and performing in bars and restaurants and the consistency of that. I think consistency 100% the same. Something that I do differently is probably it's starting even earlier. I think, as doing the whole kind of magician stuff, I wish I started quite a lot earlier. I mean, I started doing that initially when I was 12. I feel like if I started earlier, it would have been even more experience. So I think starting earlier, I don't know, I think it would have been something super simple, like just keep going, keep pushing away at it and enjoy the process of it. I feel like that's one thing that I've done very well, is always continuously enjoy the process. Like when I kind of say, I was performing in restaurants and bars and all these different things for absolutely no money, it kind of sounds like, oh, that sounds like a slog. I enjoyed the whole thing. So I would say, like, just keep enjoying it.
Yeah, great way to finish. I think listening to your story is so far removed from like 90% of our mates at university that just went to work in a desk 9 to 5 in London. It's just so refreshing to hear, like, actually there's a career like this that you've made for yourself from all of the consistency, all of the hard work you've put in, and has now led you to doing what you do. And clearly you love it a lot, and it's going in a great direction. So brilliant to hear, very refreshing, and thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Good stuff. No, thank you very much, guys. Yes. I appreciate it.
So, unreal episode, another mental guest doing cool things. What a story. Happy for me to go with the first takeaway?
Fire away.
Yeah, like I think we're both gonna have had this down, but he said it so many times, and it's such an applicable thing to probably most people listening to this, is just the fact that you should be taking risks. Like the amount of things he has got. In fact, I think most of the things we spoke about in this episode have only come about because of the fact that he took risks. Knowing that you actually have that ability to take a risk, especially in even your 30s, and having the balls to be like, I'm just gonna try things, and if they don't work, work. The worst outcome, as you said, like you move back in with your parents, like worst outcome. Best outcome is you start working with some of the best brands in the world, or do whatever it is that you've taken a risk in your chosen field. So massive takeaway for me.
Yeah, 100%. I think the age thing is so key, like especially at this stage, coming out of university or like even before university, like him. If you're in a position where the worst that could possibly happen is moving back in with your parents, like you don't have a partner to provide for, you don't have like a house to sort, you don't have any kind of life responsibilities, then purely ask yourself, if I did this step and took something that was a little bit more risky, what is the worst that could possibly happen? And if it's not that bad and you're in a lucky position that you can just move back in with your parents, then just go for it.
Yeah, spot on. Love that. Okay, takeaway for you.
Yeah. My key takeaway, I think, was that throughout this whole time, what he made clear throughout what he was talking to us about is that it was purely for the stuff that he was interested in, the stuff that he loved doing, because it was massively important to him not to care what anybody else thought. You know, it's totally irrelevant. I think probably to look at it from a different angle is like people working into the city or whatever, or like for me, for example, I feel like when I was younger, I felt a little bit of guilt thinking like, well, if my parents think this about me not going into like the medicine field, or my friends think this about me not going into the corporate field, then that's probably like influencing some of the decisions I made. Whereas he clearly never cared what anyone thought about what he was doing. He was purely doing it because that's what he loved doing, and he pursued it. So yeah, that bottom line is just don't care what anyone thinks. Do it for you.
Yeah, 100%. And like, especially as you spoke about, like he was just going into pubs and doing magic tricks and stuff like that. Like you just have to like follow your natural interests, and that's how I think people succeed. I think a lot of people end up, trying to convince themselves that they like something, and you're actually just never going to be that good at it if you are convincing yourself into something. So spot on, really like that. My last takeaway was, it's an interesting one. He used the phrase quite early. He said adapt or die. And I think what I really liked about that is he was constantly evolving to do with the situations he was in, right? So like he was in COVID and he was like, hey, what can I do to benefit the best from COVID? I'm going to get on this TikTok app that no one's really heard about. And then he kind of started this like creator house because of the fact that they had nothing to do and they wanted to go and live in a cool place. And then all of a sudden they're getting brand deals in, and then they're adapting to the fact that brands really like them. So they're like, all right, let's open more houses. And he just kept problem solving. And in that space, like that adapt or die, that really like always iterate, always think of new things and new ways that you can do things. Don't get stuck in your ways, look at new opportunities. He's very opportunistic. So I think adapt or die and being opportunistic would be like a massive takeaway for me from what we were speaking about.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that approach, given I'm slightly ignorant when it comes to like the whole social media world, but I imagine that kind of approach, like the adapt or die, is also very relevant in that space. You've always got to be keeping up with the times, what are the like most recent trends, etc. And he's applied that purely to everything he's done from like a business point of view as well. And I think it's clearly created a lot of success for him. So yeah, good takeaway. Okay, 3 brilliant takeaways and another great episode. So to summarize, the first key takeaway is just to take risks. The second one is just to not care what other people think. And the third one is to adapt or die.
Brilliantly summed up, mate, and very, very good episode. Enjoying rattling them off. You can check Charlie all over social medias that we'll put in the description. And thank you very much for him for coming on, and look forward to catching the next guest next week.
Sorry, just one last quick thing from me at the end of the episode. Thank you for getting this far. We just want to ask, if you don't already, whether you're on Apple Music or on Spotify, if you could just click that subscribe button. That would be massively helpful in us in making sure that as many people can hear about these cool careers as possible. And I'd be very grateful as we try and grow the podcast. Thank you.